Hi everyone, this is your host Latifa Swailah. Welcome to Qudwa's podcast powered by the CFA Society Bahrain. At Qudwa, we believe in the philosophy of paying it forward. This is why we are recreating our conversations that we have with people we look up to. We would like to take this time to thank Ahli United Bank in continuously supporting us in our initiatives. A positive work environment encourages individuals of all managerial levels to become invested in the tasks and projects that they're currently working on. So how can we foster such environment even if circumstances don't allow us to? Today we're joined by David Olone, who is the Deputy CEO of Treasury and Investments at Ahli United Bank Bahrain. He received an MBA from the University of Edinburgh and a graduate degree from Dublin City University. Thank you so much, David, for joining us today. Welcome. So before we start diving into the topic of positivity within the workplace, let's say, for example, that someone made a leap into a new job and it happened to be the job of their dreams. And then when they start actually working there, they begin to feel that maybe they've made the move a bit too quickly and they haven't fully considered other key elements about the job that they have said yes to. So how can you tell if you fit in your current workplace? So how do you tell if someone fits in their current workplace?
Okay, I think that there's a number of points that they can look to as to whether they fit. I think for me, the easiest way of thinking about it is that, do you actually enjoy coming into work? You don't have to enjoy it every single day, right? But on balance, do you enjoy coming into work? Because if you do, that means almost certainly that you fit, right? Now, what does that really mean? It means that you're getting satisfaction out of the job. Every job that people do will have elements that they like more and elements that they like less, right? But on balance, you're getting satisfaction out of the role. You probably are also in tune with the culture of the organization. It fits you, it feels right, it's an enabling and positive environment for you. Clearly, colleagues play a material role, and so it's likely that you'll get on with the majority of your colleagues. Again, you're not going to get on with everybody, but the majority of your colleagues. And also, I think management is very important as well. Whether it's your line manager or whether it's the very senior management within the organization, do they lead by example? Do they lead in a kind of positive and empowering way for staff? I think things like reward is important. You want to feel that you're getting paid fairly. It's not necessarily the most important thing, obviously, but it is important, and it appears. And I think particularly for people in the earlier stages of their career, it's about development. Can you see a way to develop and to grow within an organization? Can you see how your career is going to advance over a number of years? And so all of those factors together, I think, to me, is what blends into that summary of, do you enjoy coming to work? Right? And I think that's how you can tell if you fit or if you don't fit.
Okay. So what does a positive workplace culture look like to you?
I think for me, a positive workplace culture is a workplace that puts customers at the front and center of what it is that the organization does. So it really tries to be the best that it can be for its customers, right? Understanding their needs, understanding their concerns, and delivering time and time again, to customers. And I think that also then reflects internally, because how does an organization, how do the colleagues within the organization interact with each other? Okay, again, do they share the same focus, that customer focus? Do they communicate with each other in an open way? Is there an environment where people are all pulling in the same direction, right, in terms of what it is that they're trying to achieve? I think that there needs to be a degree of kindness and compassion in an organization as well, which is important, because organizations are really just a collection of obviously human beings. And I think that there's other stakeholders that are involved in organizations as well, be the shareholders or the wider community, and so on. And again, how are they treated? Do shareholders get a fair return, not necessarily an excess return? Do we get involved in social activities for society in general, and so on and so forth? So they're quite difficult things to define in real kind of almost tangible ways, but you know it, right? You can feel it, and I think that to me is the kind of major features that you would see around a positive culture.
So, under those pressuring times, I think it's quite hard to maintain positivity every single day. And it's so easy to get demotivated and stressed out at work. So, how can leaders sustain that kind of positive environment given the circumstances outside?
I think there's actually 2 points in that question. I don't think it's just about leaders. I think it's about the individual as well. So I think the individuals will never feel, you can never feel positive 100% of the time, and there will be moments that you'll feel demotivated for whatever the reasons are, and I think that's just a very natural human characteristic. But I think that if you're referring to kind of the stresses that in society at the moment, most notably COVID, I think that people are operating under much more elevated degrees of stress than historically would have been the case. And that could be to do with just genuine worries about the illness itself. It could be to do with insecurities in terms of what does the future hold, whether that's on a personal level or family level, and a whole host of other reasons. I always kind of think about some of the graduates coming out of college now and how difficult it is in order to get into an organization when organizations are either not hiring or they're operating remotely and so on and so forth. So it's a very, very challenging environment. And the reason that I think that there's an individual responsibility is you have to deal with stress and to deal with these pressures. The individual is the one that ultimately has to do this, and I think it's common sense that we all know, which is about things like in your lifestyle, getting enough sleep, having a good diet, having exercise, and so on and so forth. Talking to people if you're having an issue, right? Whether that's a confidant or even getting support, right? Mental health support if you're feeling under pressure. So I think the first thing is the responsibility on the individual to try and do their best. Now, within an organization itself, I think that leaders have to, first of all, recognize the environment that staff members are operating under, in that this is not normal. And I think that in that recognition, therefore, they probably need to be more compassionate and more supportive, right? And so if you see a staff member who is demotivated or just generally feeling down, perhaps just having a conversation with them, seeing if they're okay, seeing if you can get to the root of what the issue is and to try and help resolve it. I think the other thing about leaders as well, though, it's what they do and not what they say. And I think that leaders themselves have a responsibility in terms of being positive, being upbeat, maintaining a tempo, maintaining direction for a team in terms of what they have to achieve. And I think that if you wrap that all around into one statement, it's about how leaders, how colleagues, how we all actually operate together going forward. So I think it's the blend of the individual, the blend of the leadership, and the collective efforts of everybody that maintains that momentum and maintains that positivity in what's pretty difficult circumstances.
I have a question for you. It's kind of off topic. Sure. But how do you deal with your stress?
Mine, I think probably 3 or 4 things. So exercise is definitely one. If I go back to 2008, when we had the financial crisis, which at the time was extraordinarily material in the world, that was very stressful for me personally, and I think I took up exercising much more than I had in the past. So that's something now that I'm fairly, I wouldn't say fanatical about, but very frequent, and that helps. Okay, I think the things around trying to just have a relatively healthy diet and sleep patterns and so on and so forth. I've downloaded the Headspace app, which I've been using for I don't know how many years, which is great. So 10 minutes at the beginning of each day, 10 minutes at the end of each day, right? Just from a kind of quiet meditative perspective, just to kind of try and put some kind of calmness. And I think also I've learned to step back a little bit, in the sense of, if there's an issue, it's very easy just to go straight into the issue, right? Where actually what you might want to do is just step back out of the issue and look at things a little bit more objectively, and that can help kind of reduce down stresses as well. And then from time to time, just kind of chatting to people, and not being too hard on yourself. Sometimes it's okay not to be okay, and I think that people should recognize that too. So it's those types of things. And thankfully, stress is, a certain level of stress is important in your life in order to have, to perform and to deliver. And thankfully, in my case, stresses haven't been too overpowering that I haven't been able to deal with them. But it's something that you constantly have to monitor, and you have to constantly kind of work at. There's no one day you wake up and magic formula, you've dealt with all stresses. It's not how it works.
You're right. Completely agree with you. So before jumping on to the next question, I want to rewind a bit to you about how can leaders sustain the positive culture within the workplace. But I want to switch the table here, and let's say from the employee perspective, if they're facing themselves, they find themselves in a situation where they're in a bad workplace environment for some instance, because I know some of the listeners may be in that spot, and they find that, let's say, their boss makes them feel bad about going through bad days. So how can that employee, or the person who is facing themselves in that kind of position, maintain the positive attitude, or not break down, basically?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think an awful lot of people ultimately leave organizations not because of the organization, but because of their line manager, and that they didn't get on with their line manager, or quite often the line manager just wasn't particularly good at managing people. I mean, that's something that you can see very often. I think if somebody is having difficulty with the line manager, the best course of action for them, first of all, to do is to try and have a very objective conversation with the line manager, where they can express what it is that isn't working for them in terms of how that relationship is evolving, and to see if they can remedy that in some way. Because quite often, in my experience, line managers won't realize what it is that they're doing necessarily. People have greater or lesser degrees of emotional intelligence, so some people will pick up on it very early, and other people will just be completely blind if they're accidentally treating people inappropriately. And I would say, I don't have a percentage, but a material number of those types of cases will resolve themselves just by having those conversations and being very clear about expectations and how people are to interact. If that doesn't work, right, then absolutely you should go to the HR function. HR is there for many reasons, but one of the reasons is definitely where people have inter-organizational issues, whether they're with other colleagues or line managers or whoever it may be. And they will take a very kind of hard, kind of dispassionate, objective view, and to see if the situation can be put right. And in the main, I would say the vast majority of situations can be rectified. But I do think that if inevitably you get to a place where you just can't, right, and it might be that it's a little bit more deeper than just a line manager, right? It may be, go back to the start of the conversation, something more to do with the culture of the organization and the fit of the individual. But ultimately, I think people should exercise their right to walk, which is just to say, look, this organization isn't for me, and I'm going to move on to another one. But I think that point should be the last port of call, right? You should really try and make all of the efforts that you can to improve the situation before that.
Right. So how can we foster a culture in which there is trust between each other, and to ensure that the overall vision stays and does not stray away as the days go by?
Yeah, I think that's about openness and about transparency in terms of how people communicate with each other. So I think that people should be able to be open, to be transparent, to voice their opinions, to not to feel that they're in an environment of any kind of fear, right? Because a lot of things, I always like the phrase, get lost in translation, right? So if you're not communicating with each other, issues begin to arise that may not have been there in the first place. And I think that whole pulling together as a team and operating in a kind of collegiate, respectful way, right, is probably the single biggest thing that you can do to ensure that there's that kind of positive culture. And trust is one of these things, I suppose, that takes a long time to build up within a team, and it takes a nanosecond to disappear, right? But then that goes back to the point we made around respect and people operating in a collegiate fashion. The vision itself won't change. I mean, I think if everybody understands the vision of their organization, then that shouldn't change, and I don't think that'll be that much of an issue. I think it's how people work together is what the issue is. And as I said, I think it's communication and openness is what people need to focus on there.
So you're a leader with more than 20 years of experience. So I want to know about your perspective in terms of navigating through office politics.
Yeah, I think office politics is an interesting phrase, and it's sometimes probably misunderstood. Okay, so you get the politics that's viewed in a very negative way, and really what that's actually about is probably about gossip and people just wasting time basically. So I think where there's a negative vibe coming out of office politics, my advice to people is just to ignore it completely, right? And don't engage in it, because it's of zero productivity. In fact, it's negative in terms of it takes people away from doing what they should be doing. The kind of less thought, the kind of less defined route, I suppose, of office politics is really how does an organization actually operate, right? And anybody who's done their kind of business studies degrees or MBAs will look at the difference between the formal and the informal organization. And the formal is what you see on your org chart, and the informal is actually how the organization works, and they're not identical. They'll have a high degree of commonality, but they're not identical. And I think in those circumstances, if you define politics as how do you operate within the informal organization, right, then that's not a negative thing, right? It's basically how do you get things done, right, within an organization. And I think therefore what you have to understand is who's important, right? Who has influence, right? Who can help in terms of getting whatever it is that you're looking to get done, right? And then it comes down to how do you build a relationship in that network, right? How do you use your people skills, right, in order to be seen as a kind of credible colleague within that network. And that goes a little bit also to personal branding as well. But ultimately it all boils down to delivery, right? And people's reputations in organizations that are developed in a positive fashion always come back to whether they're viewed as individuals who deliver. And if they're viewed as individuals that deliver, their reputations grow, their network grows, their ability to influence grows. And that's all very, very positive, right, from my perspective. So I think, it might have been a better word if they didn't call it office politics, but they called it office diplomacy, because that to me is kind of a better description of it. But nonetheless, I think that's the important part of an organization, and how you extract the best value in terms of that informal structure.
You actually answered my second question in the fact that can we see office politics in such a positive light? Because I see it as a way to influence other people as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. As I said, you can't deliver anything realistically on your own in any real walk of life, right? So most delivery, particularly in a commercial organization, is teams of people delivering together, or leaders delivering through working with others, right? And therefore the necessity to be able to use the network in an organization in order to deliver on behalf of the organization, it's critical, right? And so the importance of being able to, as I said, navigate your way through that informal structure with the key decision makers, influencers, doers, so on and so forth, is critical for anybody's ability to progress, and for the organization also to deliver what it needs to deliver to customers. And so that way is if you think about it, is the essence of what actually an organisation does, right? And so the importance of that you can't understate. I just think the definition of office politics is usually not pointed towards that, right? Usually when somebody says the phrase office politics, they're thinking about, the kind of gossip and the rumours and, the person on the fourth or first floor or second floor or whatever it might be, right? That's the connotation that usually springs to mind, and all of that stuff is a waste of time, right? But using the organisation to the best of its ability to deliver, which is the other side of the equation, is critical.
So if someone finds themselves in a position where they're in the middle of a gossip between their colleagues, what can they do about it?
Yeah, I think you got two choices realistically. One is just ignore it on the basis that it's just that, it's gossip. But if people are talking inappropriately, right, and the definition of inappropriate, by the way, is probably comes from the person they're talking about, right, i.e. the individual in case of the conversations, I would certainly go to either line managers or HR, right, because that type of activity just shouldn't happen. So I think that's it. I think ignore or HR.
Ignore HR. I love it. Thank you so much, David. That was really great insight and advice that you just given us, and I really appreciate you taking your time and giving us this
No problem.
session.
Anytime.
Thank you. Thank you guys so much for tuning into this episode. If you like this episode, please don't forget to subscribe so that you don't miss out on any episodes.